Welcome to the Heavenly Signs and Wonders series. I'm going to try to do these videos in two parts. It's a lot of information. Part one, we're going to discuss a quick review of where we're at and an overview of signs and symbols and timeline of John's Revelation. We're going to talk about Heavenly Signs and Wonders, and then we're going to cover Revelation chapter 7, which is the closing of the sixth seal. In part two, we will get into the opening of the seventh seal, some cool references to Daniel and some understanding that is given to us about things that happen in the sixth and seventh seal. And then we will end with Revelation chapter 12, which takes us back to the councils in heaven where John is witnessing the vision of the seven seals. If you have not done so, please consider watching my introductory video, which will help you understand what rules I follow in terms of how I do my research and present it to you, the rules that the Lord has provided, which include that our God is an unchanging God. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. That we can look for when we study, we look for eternal truths that are unchanging. If anything that we conclude goes against doctrine, then we can know we're wrong. That's the first thing. Second, we look for principles. How does the Lord want us to apply what we're learning to me right here, right now? That's how I find the principles. We're looking for patterns. Patterns tell us, as an unchanging God, that what he did then, he will do now, that he is a consistent God, that he does not break his patterns. And finally, we look for symbols and we seek to understand what those symbols mean based on work with the Spirit, as well as looking for, again, patterns in using of those symbols. So please review that introductory video if you have not done so. It goes a little bit more into depth about sort of the things that I use around the research here. Thank you. If you've watched my previous video regarding the first 6 chapters of Revelation, this page will look similar or will be familiar. This is the broad overview to help with myopia, to help us to make sure that we're taking a step back so we know where we are and don't get lost in the details. We discussed in a previous video of the first 6 chapters. The first 3 are the call to the assemblies of the earth, to the call to all of the churches of God through all generations of time, through all the dispensations, so that John, who can help us see, hear, and understand the unveiling of Christ and his role in the world, in the earth life of the children of men, from the beginning to the end. In chapters 4 and 5, we discussed how John was caught up into a vision wherein he saw the grand councils of heaven, where the 7 seals were presented as the plan from the Father, and that the Lamb of God was the only one who could open those seals. Then in chapter 6, he began to see the first 6 seals. And as stated before, Joseph Smith taught that not much time and energy is put into the first 5 because those had already occurred, and that John's job was to reveal that which would shortly come. And so the primary focus for the rest of the Revelation is from the 6th seal to the end. And so in Revelation chapter 6, we have a quick opening of the first 5 seals, which we actually will talk more about as we go further, because they will play out in some future information as we cover it in future videos. So then in chapter 7, which is where we're going to start today, we see the closing of the 6th seal, the scenes that are surrounding that time period. Revelation chapters 8 and 9 include what happened at the opening of the 7th seal. Chapter 10 is a vision to John that happens. It's kind of like the movie Inception. If you've seen it, it's like a dream in a dream. I want you to kind of look at it that way, because it's John's foreordination. It's a vision that John sees, but he sees it at a period in the timeline that is significant, and we'll talk more about that then. And then Revelation chapter 11, which is also a key element, a key event that happens in the 6th seal, and I'll show you how that plays into the timeline. So chapter 10 and 11 are not chronological necessarily, but they're shown to John during the 6th seal, and I'll explain that when we get there. And then we're going to end at chapter 12, which brings us back to the war in heaven, or the councils in heaven. And we'll basically make that little loop of the orange section there on your screen. As we've discussed in previous videos, the Lord uses numbers and other visual metaphors as symbols, just like he used parables to help us find deeper insight. I want you to keep in mind the number 7. It's a big one in the book of Revelation. I want you to keep in mind the number 10. That one comes up a lot. And then in terms of other signs and symbols, the Lord gives us a lot of things that help us to point to time periods. The feasts, for example, the ancient Jewish feasts were symbolic. They told a story that when one studies them deeper, can understand the deeper meaning, just like the parables in the New Testament. Well, throughout the scriptures, the Lord has given us um, a list of different kinds of signs that he's going to use to communicate to his people about the times that we're in. And I've got some verses here. I'm going to read through them because I think they are valuable to us. And it's just a few. There's many more signs that are all throughout the scriptures that point to the last days and speak of these same things. But I picked out a few that cover the basis. Amos chapter 8, verse 9 says, "And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord God, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day." Joel chapter 2, verse 10 also speaks of the sun and the moon going dark, and it says the stars withdraw their shining. Joel chapter 2 also verses 30 and 31 says, "And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come." Isaiah chapter 13, verse 10 is a repeat of this same darkening of the stars, moon, sun, referring to those as giving us signs. Matthew chapter 24, when the brethren, the apostles, have asked the Lord about when he will return again, it's also recorded in Mark 13. The Lord said that in the last days, says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven." Doctrine and Covenants, section 34, we also read, "But before that great day shall come, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon turned into blood, and the stars shall refuse their shining, and some shall fall, and great destructions await the wicked." So these sound really precarious and sometimes a little bit scary, and we don't necessarily 100% fully understand what these mean. In my research, I've thought long and hard about these different signs and how they point to things that are going to come. So if we think about a sign, I heard somebody else talk about like a stop sign. You see a stop sign, it means that you're going to be coming to a stop. Signs are given as a warning that something's about to happen. Again, driving signs, you see a yellow sign with a curvy road on it. It's telling you that up ahead is going to be a curvy road. And so when we think about the signs and wonders that God gives us in the heaven, we often can relate that to the idea that he is telling us that something is coming. Well, when can we identify, for example, when the stars are telling us something or when the sun being darkened is telling us something? I also noted here that he uses the same language: voices, thunderings, lightning, hail, and earthquakes. And are those always literal? Or are they signs or symbols, or do they come in ways that are similar or represent those kinds of things? And then what do they mean? We're not going to be able to cover all of them, but I'm going to cover some that I think are of great importance to us. Let's begin with the opening of the restoration. So in the middle or nearing the end of the 6th seal, which is the time that Joseph Smith is born, some really big things happened cosmically, and I don't think that they can go unnoticed. So Joseph Smith was born in 1805. In 1806, there was a total solar eclipse that went over America. It started down in the southwest and it went up through Arizona and then over across Mississippi into the Ohio's, Pennsylvania, New York. And if you know anything about Joseph Smith and his life, that does follow a little bit of a path. But again, that's just nice to know, suspicious. Remember my rules, we've got to have several witnesses, right? But so that's just an interesting thing. We're going to talk in a minute just about how can we identify if a total solar eclipse is a thing, because those happen all the time. How do we know when it's a sign or when it's just the cosmos, just the normal rotation of the cosmos? But that did happen. And then a few years later, in 1811 and 1812, we have historical earthquakes that to this day we've not seen anything like it since, over the Madrid fault line area in southern Missouri and Alabama, or yeah, Arkansas, sorry. But primarily right there by the Mississippi River in 1811, beginning in December through March of 1812, there were thousands of earthquakes, or there was like hundreds and over 1,000 earthquakes that hit, and some of them were so massive they completely changed the landscape of the area. They were felt as far away as New York and Washington, D.C. It's noted in that the president and his wife felt them in Washington, D.C. The earthquakes were massive. It was noted that the Mississippi River at one point went backwards for a while. Massive earthquakes happened there, and they shook the earth severely. Fortunately, not a lot of people lived in the area at the time, and so we have no idea what the death toll was or how it affected the people that were living there at the time. But we do know that it was massive and it caused the earth to change literally. And so that's an interesting thing as well, the timing of it, because we recognize that there are earthquakes and things that happen whenever big things happen, spiritually speaking. And Joseph Smith ended up having his vision not many years after that. And so this happens after Joseph Smith is born. But another thing happened at that time that was a less known thing for me. I didn't know. But there's a comet whose orbit it comes around the Earth every 3,064 years. And so it was in the sky, visible for 17 months around the time of these earthquakes. And it is said in the history records that it was its brightest right at the time of these earthquakes. And the last time this this comet would have been seen in the sky was during the reign of Ramses II, which would have been at the time of Moses. Now, if you listen to my last video, and I talked about Pergamos, which was related to Moses, and Philadelphia related to Joseph Smith, then you recognize that there is a special connection when God says to Moses, I will raise up one like you, Moses, that this comet would have been in the sky during Moses' time, and then again during Joseph's time. To me, those are not coincidences. There are, often we say, not coincidences in the gospel. But here's what I'm talking about in terms of multiple witnesses and signs. And remember, I said that the sign comes before to point to something that is to come. So it wouldn't necessarily be at the time that the thing is happening, but as a sign that something is going to happen. So we have this total eclipse that goes over. We have the earthquakes that happen. Then we have the earthquakes. Then we have this comet that goes by, this star or fiery mountain, as it is sometimes referred to in the scriptures, that goes by the earth that is seen with the naked eye. And also, then there is a volcanic eruption that happens. And that volcanic eruption happened overseas, but it was so, I'm sure you're familiar, hopefully you're familiar, it caused the year without a summer. And it was the reason that Joseph Smith family left New England and moved down into New York, where the spiritual revival was going on in 1819 or 18. They moved there earlier than that, but the 1820s when he ends up as a 14-year-old boy trying to figure out what church he should join. So in the years leading up to Joseph Smith, we have, again, sun goes dark. We have a star falling, technically, that covers the sky that people can see for 17 straight months. We have massive earthquakes. We have a volcanic eruption. Does that sound like voices, thunderings, lightnings, hail, earthquake? All at once, pointing to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear that the Lord is about to do something big. Then in 1820, Joseph Smith pleads with the Lord, which church should I join? And we know that he had a heavenly vision, that he saw God the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, who told him to join none of the churches. I bear my witness at this time that those things are true, that Joseph did see the Father and the Son, and I know that by witness of the Holy Ghost. I know that that was a significant moment. It was a time prepared long before the foundations of the world, as John saw, that this young boy would come to fulfill the mission which he was foreordained to do, which was to be the head of the dispensation of the fullness of times. Joseph prayed and asked God which church to join. He told them the creeds were an abomination, that none of the churches were his, that their lips drew near to God, but their hearts were far from him. The candlestick and the temple ordinances and blessings, the Melchizedek priesthood, had been withdrawn from the earth for a long period of time. A great apostasy covered the entire earth. The house of Israel had been scattered throughout the world, but God remembers his covenant people. And on September 22nd of 1827, the trumpet blew with the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, the trumpet blew. God remembers his covenant people, and Joseph was given the gold plates. Now we know that the Book of Mormon was given as a reaping tool, a sickle. It was given to Joseph to be a record of a remnant of the house of Jacob, to bring to the world the gospel of Jesus Christ and to remind the world of a God, a covenant-making God, and to act as a second witness of Jesus Christ. So, interestingly enough, there's a heavenly sign and wonder that happens on that day or 2 days later. And I'm going to talk about that when we get to chapter 12, but there is one in the stars, which acts again as a further witness. Excuse me. So God gives us heavenly signs and wonders. How can we know, besides the fact that we can couple them together looking backward and seeing the total eclipse, the earthquakes, the volcano, the comet, all of those things coupled together, we can look at that and go, oh yeah, there they were. How do we know, can we know at the time that they're happening that they are a sign? Well, there's a couple of things that we can do. One is we can dive in and study. Now, let's talk about solar eclipses for a second. How often does a solar eclipse happen? Well, a lot. Solar eclipses happen at least twice a year. Total solar eclipses. Most calendar years have 2 solar eclipses. The maximum number of solar eclipses that can take place in the same year is 5, but this is rare. Lunar eclipses, we're not going to talk much about the moon, mostly because my work hasn't gone there yet. There are signs with the moon. As you know, as we've talked about before, the ancient Israelites used the moon to identify their calendar. So that plays an interesting role, but we're not going to talk much about the moon. Lunar eclipses, however, happen at least twice a year. I said total solar eclipses. That was just regular. We don't always have a total solar eclipse. Total solar eclipses, when the moon completely darkens the sun, happens every 1 to 3 years. But we have solar eclipses at least twice a year, sometimes up to 5. For any given place on Earth, and this is really important, for any given place on Earth where you can see a total solar eclipse of the sun, that typically only appears just once every 375 to 400 years, and that's according to NASA. So to be standing on a spot on Earth to be able to see a total solar eclipse more than once typically only happens every 375 to 400 years. But we know that that isn't the case all the time because we just experienced the opportunity to see 2 of them in a period of 7 years. And I'm going to talk about those next. Now remember the number 7. 7 is an important number. It's an important number with the book of Revelation. It's very much tied to the apocalypse that John saw. And whenever we're seeing 7s, particularly when we're thinking of signs and wonders, we need to not ignore the number 7. The Lord speaks to us through the number 7. And we had a total solar eclipse that happened over a 7-year period. And there was a lot of Christianity and a lot of people in the world who wondered, what does this mean? How come we're getting to have this 7-year spread? And it was cause for much uproar. And in 2017, when the first eclipse went over the United States, I was fascinated by it. And I started to do a deep dive about, well, how can we know if this really means anything? And I wondered to myself, well, if it only really happens typically about every 375 to 400 years, according to NASA, when's the last time there was a 7-year crossover event of a country? And I discovered that there was one from 1999 to 2006. I'll get back to that in just a second. And then, of course, there's this one that we were experiencing then in 2017 and 2024. And I looked at a map and it can show us when it will happen again. And that's actually a fascinating thing. The next crossover event happens in 27 to 2034, and it's over the Red Sea, Egypt, and the Israel area. There's clearly a pattern emerging here. These 7-year events that cross over particular parts of the land where a very rare event happens where we get to see a total solar eclipse cross over the Earth. It can't be ignored. The first one crossed over Turkey. And it should be noted that the first event happened in 1999. It passed right by modern day Nicaea. 6 days later, there was a massive earthquake that killed almost 20,000 people. That crossover event went right over Haran, which is where Abraham made his covenants with God. They saw the total solar eclipse over the land that was Haran. It crossed over what would be called Babylon, Iraq. Today, it crossed over what is Babylon, and passed by where Mount Ararat is, where we believe that potentially Noah's Ark has been left. Turkey is the old world. It was Assyria. It crossed over Libya, which is mentioned as a place where there will be wars in the last days, known as Put, P-H-U-T, in the Bible. This is a significant land in terms of the old world. And this 7-year crossover event happens on a time frame that is of significance, which we will talk about in a couple of slides. The second one in 2006 went up through Turkey, and the place that it passed over is Cappadocia, which is noted in the Old Testament. But it is significant to me that this crossover event happens in the old world, where now there is a 98% Muslim population. It is the area that originally was called the seat of Christianity. The 7 churches in Asia Minor that John talks about are in Turkey today, or part of Turkey today. When we discuss later Babylon and it's the scattering of Israel, this is the land we're talking about and the peoples. And so I'll touch briefly that Babylon conquers Judah, and then Persia, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon, and then the Macedonian Empire conquers Persian, and then the Roman Empire, and then eventually they're all split up and spread out in this whole area and reign with power over the whole area. And that comes in later. We'll talk about that in the next video. But this land is significant, and it happened in 1999 to 2006. And then we have a crossover event that happens in 2017 that comes right over, literally, Jackson County, Missouri, which is named the center place of the New Jerusalem. In fact, that was where the longest portion of the eclipse was seen, was if you were standing literally in Jackson County, Missouri, and we're looking up on my website, I quote a gentleman who was standing there and could look up and see the Regulus star with his naked eye. With his bare eyes, because the sky was so black. And we know that place has been named the center place of the New Jerusalem. Then it crosses over again in 2024, and it cuts up through the southeastern corner of Missouri. And it is also noted on the first crossover event that it crosses over 7 Salems. Salem is the word for peace, Jerusalem being the place of peace or the city of peace. I am going to show you that this crossover event in 2017 was a sign that the peace is coming to an end, and we'll talk about that in a moment. There is some talk about the second crossover event, that it passes by, not necessarily over 7 Ninevehs in the United States. There are 8 Ninevehs that we know of. One is up in Canada. It crosses by them, as opposed to the first crossover that literally went right over 7 Salems. The I think it might be a little bit of a stretch, but it is noted that it came up by 7 Ninevehs that are in and around where the crossover event took place. And Nineveh is relevant because it is where the other crossover event was. Iraq is just to the east of where the other crossover event took place, and Iraq would have been Nineveh in Jonah's day. Also, there is evidence that there was a crossover event or at least a total solar eclipse during the time that Jonah was there. And all of that information is on my website if you want to look into that more. It's just fascinating information. To those people, they would have seen it as an omen that something bad was happening and that it was a time to repent. And it may have been instrumental in helping Jonah get the people to realize that he was a messenger from God and that they did need to repent. So that's an interesting study all by itself if you want to go look at that a little bit further. So it may be a stretch to consider that it went right over the Ninevites here, but all things are here pointing to that these were significant events. As I was studying and trying to understand what we were to make of these 2/7 crossover events, one day I was in prayer about it, and I was just listening to different podcasts and people talking about things and just doing the research and searching and pondering. And I heard somebody say, did you know that right at the exact midpoint of the 2017 and 2024 crossover event, there was another total solar eclipse that happened over South America? And I started to look into it, and I determined that it, and I could be totally wrong, but it didn't really mean anything to me. But what it did, the total solar eclipse didn't necessarily mean anything to me because it makes sense. Again, the cosmos is on a cycle, and you should expect that we would have these things happen again. And so is it just coincidence? Doesn't mean anything. What it did for me was it helped me to realize that these signs, like I said, point to something. And so I thought, are they pointing to a midpoint year? What happens in the midpoint years of these 7 years? Now, one of the symbols that we talk about later in the book of Revelation is the many different ways that John uses the numbers or uses numbers and symbols to identify 3.5, which is half of 7, which I think is also telling. So he uses 42 months, which is a 3.5 year period. He uses 1,260 days. He uses time, times, and half time, which is 1 plus 2 plus a half, so 3.5. He literally says 3.5. So the number 3.5 is used often as this incomplete 7, this half of 7, which supports the idea that there might be something maybe at the midpoint or something that the Lord is pointing to that happens in between these 7 period stretches, these 7-year stretches. So I started to look at that more deeply, and I think I've discovered some really important things that I'm excited to share. Before I reveal what those things are, I want to talk about Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7 is, as you know, in the Revelation chapter 6, John was shown the seals 1 through 6. And when we get to chapter 7, we understand that this is something that happens at the end of the 6th seal. Joseph Smith asked the Lord about it, and he confirmed that this is an event that is to take place at the end of the 6th seal and at the opening of the 7th seal. As we discussed in the video about ancient Israel in the latter days, I spoke a little bit about the Sabbath and how it's used to count time. And when we talked about the Sabbath day, the Sabbath week, the Sabbath month, and the Sabbath year, those times were holy convocations. They were times of rest. And when we say rest, we do not mean sleep. We mean rest from our regular labor. And it is a day that is given to the Lord, or a time period that is given to the Lord. It is his time. It is a sacred time. It's a time that we assemble. They're usually associated with solemn assemblies, meaning that we come together and we might see in our day a Hosanna shout, which was very similar to the shouts that they gave, which were related to the Psalms. We can find in the Psalms similar shouts of pleading with God for salvation to save us. So assembly that is set aside as a holy assembly where we come together with a Hosanna shout. It's a time of learning and peace. It's a time of restoration and cleansing and sanctifying. And so the 50th year was set as a Jubilee year. And I shared that we can look at a timeline and understand that 120 years that the Lord gave, that number 120 times 50 is 6,000 years. Now, to John, that makes a lot of sense because we understand that each of the periods of the seals, Joseph revealed that the Lord told him that those were about 1,000-year periods. And we looked at those time periods and we understand that the seventh seal should have been opened somewhere around the year 2000. But how can we know? How can we know that it happened? Well, again, the Lord gives signs and wonders and multiple witnesses to help us understand these things. So we have this chapter 7, and let me back up and say there is the Joseph Smith Foundation that is not of the church. It's a separate foundation of people who are historians who have done their goal and purpose is to find supporting evidence and to really just help share the gospel and to find truth. They seek to be very doctrinally accurate. josephsmithfoundation.org. Their historians put together a timeline of the Earth based on multiple calendaring systems. They put those calendaring systems together. They used computer models, and they found a 1 in 15 billion chance that 3 of them lined up to a day 1. And we already know by Revelation that day 1 technically is somewhere around 4000 BC, but they were able to identify based on the different calendars, and I really hope that you'll go and look at it and study it for yourself. It's very beautiful. It's an incredible timeline that they've put together that you can download and for free. It's all there. It's wonderful. It's very complex and it's very thorough. So check it out. But anyway, they're able to, based on the cycle of the, I believe they use the Venus cycle and the Hebrew calendar, they go backwards, and they take the Gregorian calendar backwards. As you know, we used to use the Julian, but they take us back on the Gregorian calendar so that we know what it is in our timeline, on our calendar, that we can understand. And they're able to find them all on the same day. A 1 in 15 billion chance that they all start on a particular day, and it would have been April 9th of 4001 BC. And I'm going to go off of that because 1 in 15 billion chance is pretty scientifically sound as a unique alignment that makes a lot of sense off of the Gregorian and the Hebrew and this Venus calendar. And they use other calendars as well, but it gives us an idea that that's where we start. And if that is true, then Jesus came 4,000 years later in 1 AD, and then the 6,000 year period should end in April. So there's no year 0, right? So if we go 4001 BC, then that takes us to 2000. April 9th of 2000 is the 6,000 years is done. And when the seal should have been open is in that year. That also then would be the last Jubilee year, is from April 9th of 2000 to April 9th of 2001. Obviously, our calendars aren't exactly perfect, and the 9th of the month is probably, maybe we are not as perfect on that. I don't know that. I'm not smart enough to know that that is going to be an exact understanding, but we should understand that somewhere around April to April of the year 2000 to 2001 should have been the final Jubilee year. Well, interestingly enough, in October of 1999, Elder L. Tom Perry gave a talk that was called The Coming Jubilee Year, and spoke about what it was like to be in a Jubilee year, and then encouraged us to celebrate the coming Jubilee year. And he talked about the things that I've talked about before. What was the Jubilee for? It was a year of rest. It was a year of restitution. It was a year of celebration. It was a time in ancient Israel that the 12 tribes were accounted for because it was an assembly, so they all needed to be there. And debts were paid. They did not harvest their fields in terms of like planting new plants. They did partake of the fruits of their fields if they grew on their own, but they did not work in their fields. They let the earth rest for a year. And so this final Jubilee year is this period of rest that we should be looking for, right? And again, L. Tom Perry literally tells us the coming Jubilee year, we should celebrate it. Well, there's other many signs and wonders that help us understand that that was a significant year. But let's go to Revelation chapter 7 and find out what has to happen to know that we're closing out the sixth seal and ready to open up the seventh seal. Well, the first few verses talk about, after these things, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth. Remember, 4 represents the whole earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Okay? An angel comes out to the angels that are over the earth and says, let the earth rest. So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, oh, that sounds familiar. Well, let's see. Does this sound like a Jubilee year? And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 and all the tribes of children of Israel. Oh, we're accounting for the tribes of Israel. I'm going to skip down because they go through and they account for the tribes of Israel. The 144,000 is a title. We have to recognize, again, this is symbolic. Numbers are symbolic. We can break it down. Here it literally says, and there were sealed 140 and 4,000. We always just say 144,000, which is true. 144,000 is 12 times 12 times 1,000 or 10, whatever. It's the 12 tribes, 12,000 of 12 tribes, right? It's the full and complete house of Israel, all of them. When we have a 1,000 or even a 10 or 100 added or multiplied on a number, it amplifies the number. It tells us it's a lot of something. So 12 is where we're starting here. 12 being the full complete priesthood amplified. It's 12 times 12 times 1,000, right? So it's the full complete priesthood. Also, it's written in 140 and 4,000, which this comes up again later too. Well, what's 100? 100 is 10 times 10. So the complete ordinal cycle amplified. 40 is a number that is used as a period of chastisement or cleansing or preparation. Think about 40 days in the wilderness, fasting for 40 days, 40 days on the ark. Salt Lake Temple was built in 40 years. 40 is used as a time of preparation. Joseph Smith identified it as a time of not judgment, but chastisement and correcting and preparation for the Lord, right? A preparing or refining. Time of refining maybe is a good way to say it. So we've got our 140. So these people have been prepared, and 4,000, 4 times 1,000, the whole earth amplified. So the prepared people from the earth amplified. Isn't that beautiful? 144,000 has such a deep meaning, but they're accounted for, and they're the 12 tribes, and they're here assembled. And we have this grand event that happens, and I'm going to read from that. And I'm starting in verse 9. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. Okay, what does that sound like? A whole nation clothed in white robes. We know that when we're talking about white robes, we mean purified. We relate that to this picture that they're all standing in white robes, but we relate that to the temple where we wear white as a symbol of purity and sanctification, that the Lord has purified us through the covenant relationship. And palms in their hands. We know that that is in reference to Palm Sunday, the waving of the palms, the palm fronds, and the Hosanna shout. They at the triumphal entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem, they waved the palms and they gave the Hosanna shout from Psalm, which was a call to God save us. The Hosanna shout is, oh, save us, right? The call to their Redeemer. And cried with a loud voice, saying, salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. So that's a direct call to that Hosanna shout. And all the angels stood round about the throne. So we see those in our little picture here on the screen, and about the elders and the 4 beasts. So all the hosts of heaven that John saw are all there at this grand event with the people of the earth, and fell before the throne on their faces and worshiped God, saying, amen, blessing, glory, and wisdom, and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be unto our God forever and ever. Amen. So they're all before the throne of God, worshiping him in praise. And one of the elders answered, saying unto me, John, what are these which are arrayed in white robes, and whence came they? And I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth upon the throne shall dwell among them. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Now let's think briefly about the Laodiceans and what John was told to tell the Laodiceans, that the Lord would call them his people, that he says, buy of me gold refined, be dressed in white linen. This is who he's talking to, is the people of the seventh seal, or the sixth, from the seventh messenger. We're talking about the people who are called out of the sixth seal, who are under a covenant relationship from the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. These are they who came out of great tribulation. So there's this grand event, which sounds very much like a temple dedication. There are angels around the throne of God. There's much praise and worship, and everyone dressed in white, representing their purity, who do this Hosanna shout. Well, so we're looking for a Jubilee year where there is a grand event that goes to the whole world. Now, there's a couple of events that happen in the world during that time, but I think it's important for us to make sure that we're looking to see that every aspect is covered. For example, Palmyra temple was dedicated in that year, but it was the first time that a dedication was broadcast, but it was only sent out to stakes throughout America and Canada. Can't say that the whole world participated in that. There was another event that happened. It was not a temple dedication, but it was a dedication, and it was broadcast out to the world. It went to about 50 countries, and that was at General Conference that year. But remember that I said that I felt that these 7-year crossover events might be pointing to a midpoint year? I think it would be interesting to note that there is a grand event that does in fact get broadcast out to many countries, I think over 78 countries throughout the world, that is a temple dedication, and it's a significant one. And we're going to talk about that next. So remember that we have a crossover event that happened in 1999 that started, and that's the one that comes from the top left corner down over Turkey, and then a second one that occurred in 2006, 7 years later, that came from the bottom up through Turkey. And I tried to overlap those maps so that you could see what I'm talking about there. And the midpoint year that would have been the exact center of those crossover events would have been from June of 2002 to June of 2003. And what happens, first I want to talk about there was a dedication that happened at the end of the Jubilee year. So in the Jubilee year, and you can see President Hinckley here waving his handkerchief to show us how to do the Hosanna shout, there was a really special dedication that happened, and that was of the conference center. And so we may consider that this is the event of chapter 7. I'm not sure. Maybe the things combined, all of those things that happened during this time, are what count. I'm not really sure, but I'm just going to give you the information, and you can make of it what you would like. In the October General Conference in 2000, the conference center was complete, and President Hinckley dedicated the building by calling a solemn assembly and offering a Hosanna shout. He said, "As I contemplate this marvelous structure adjacent to the temple, there comes to mind the great prophetic utterance of Isaiah. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, O house of Jacob. Come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord." I believe that prophecy applies to this is still President Hinckley talking. He says, "I believe that prophecy applies to the historic and wonderful Salt Lake Temple." Did you hear that? President Hinckley says, "I believe that prophecy applies to the historic and wonderful Salt Lake Temple, but I believe also that it is related to this magnificent hall, for it is from this pulpit that the law of God shall go forth, together with the word and testimony of the Lord." So in the Jubilee year, we have this dedication, which is broadcast out into the world. It was not a temple dedication, but it was essentially before the throne of God. Literally, the conference center stands before the temple of God. And we have a Hosanna shout in that Jubilee year. The Jubilee year would have ended in April and then of 2001. And as we are aware, a very big event happens in September, on the 11th of September that year, which is, to me, a very clear sign of things that happen later in the book of Revelation. But the World Trade Center is attacked. And the conference just after that, President Hinckley said something profound. And for the next couple of decades, people would realize what he had just said in that conference, and we would relate it to the Twin Towers and what happened there. And while the Twin Towers might relate to what he said, I think that it is powerful to consider the fact that he's headed towards the midpoint year of the 7-year crossover event over Turkey, over the old world. So in October of 2001, after the towers went down, President Hinckley said in his talk, the first talk of the session on Saturday morning, he says, "The era in which we live is the fullness of times spoken of in the scriptures, when God has brought together all of the elements of previous dispensations. From the day that he and his beloved son manifested themselves to the boy Joseph, there has been a tremendous cascade of enlightenment poured out upon the world. The hearts of men have turned to their fathers in fulfillment of the words of Malachi. The vision of Joel has been fulfilled." Don't miss those words. The vision of Joel has been fulfilled, wherein the Lord declared. Now, before I read it, I just want to point out that when Moroni came to Joseph in preparation of giving him the plates, he quoted this very same scripture and told Joseph that it was not yet fulfilled, but it would soon be. Here at the end of the Jubilee year, as we're leading into the midpoint year of this crossover event, the prophet announces that this has been fulfilled. And this is what it says. "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit, and I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke." That sounds like the Twin Towers, right? But he also says, "The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call." So many over the years since this talk have related his words to the attack on the World Trade Center, which does not necessarily fulfill the entire quote from Joel. But the crossover event that was occurring at the time does have greater significance in light of other witnesses. Then came the Turkey crossover events, midpoint year, which would have been June 4th, 2002 to June 3rd of 2003. President Hinckley had the Nauvoo Temple rebuilt, and it was dedicated in June of 2002. Here's some facts and figures about the Nauvoo Temple dedication. The first dedication broadcast, it was the first dedication broadcast to the whole world, meaning the Palmyra one, just like I said, only went to the United States and some states in Canada. This was the first one that went out into the world. And it went further than conference. It went to more countries than conference. It also was available online. Later, obviously, the dedication prayer and stuff came online. Let's see. So the dedication of the conference center in the actual millennial year may be worth our consideration, as it went to 50 countries. But here, the language in chapter 7 of Revelation, it leaves me wondering if it needs to be a temple dedication is being described. And there are some key things that happen at the Nauvoo dedication that we need to note. The Nauvoo Temple dedication was broadcast to more than 70 countries in late June of 2002. It was the 158 years after Joseph and Hiram had been martyred, and they did that on purpose. They did it on that date. In the Nauvoo dedicatory prayer, think about Revelation chapter 7, when John asks, or when the angel, the elder, asks John who these people are, and then tells him, these are they. I'm going to just remind you, it says, therefore are they before, let's see. And I said unto him, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, These are they which came out of great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. In the dedicatory prayer of the Nauvoo Temple, President Hinckley said, Thou knowest, dear Father, of the travails of those who made that long journey. Many died and were buried along the trail of tears. Great was their suffering, tremendous their courage. We thank thee that those harsh days are now long past. We thank thee for the season in which we live, with the many blessings of peace and prosperity which we enjoy at thy hands. Thy spirit has brooded over us and moved upon us, and in obedience to its promptings we have now reconstructed on this hallowed ground the temple that once stood here. Held on the anniversary of the martyrdom of Joseph and Hyrum, he said, and you can find this in the church newsroom report, at the time that they were sealing the capsule, in the cornerstone box earlier in the day, President Hinckley spoke of the unseen audience that was to be expected at the dedication. Think about the angels and those that are all before the throne of God. Key elements of the Revelation of 7 summarized: a great multitude of all nations. Nauvoo was broadcast throughout the world. Stood before the throne and before the Lamb. The temple is the Lord's throne or house on earth. Clothed in white robes, white worn in the temple, also symbolizing our purity and the sanctifying that is required through our initiatory, through our baptism and initiatory. Palms in their hands, shouting salvation to our God and the Lamb. A Hosanna shout is given. Angels surround the throne. President Hinckley remarks of the unseen audience. Who are these that are arrayed in white robes? Thou knowest, dear Father, of the travails. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away the tears from their eyes. In the April 2020 conference, the prophet President Nelson declared, We live in the day that our forefathers have waited with anxious expectation. We have front row seats to witness live what the prophet Nephi saw only in vision, that the power of the Lamb of God would descend upon the covenant people of the Lord, who were scattered upon all the face of the earth, and they were armed with righteousness and with power of God and great glory. And then he said to us, You, my brothers and sisters, are among those men, women, and children whom Nephi saw. Think of that. So we can say that chapter 7 has been fulfilled, whether it was through the combination of events or whether it was the Nauvoo temple dedication itself. Nevertheless, we have a Jubilee year that can be accounted for in the year 2000, and an event that is a great solemn assembly where Hosanna shout was held by those who have been washed in the blood of the Lamb. We're going to take a little intermission so that we can digest all of the things that we've discussed over the last hour. And the concluding part of the Heavenly Signs and Wonders series will be found in part 2. I hope that you will watch that video and keep going with me. We will pick up at chapter 8.